The function of informal logic is to analyze statements made that are made to get to a certain conclusion within the confines of natural language. During the process that you undergo when you're analyzing something, you use critical thinking and then you apply skepticism of the conclusion if you are able to identify one or more logical fallacies. This is very different than the fallacy fallacy. The fallacy occurs if and only if somebody says that your argument sucks, therefore your conclusion's false. Or you had a fallacy in your argument, therefore your conclusion's false. That may not be the case. The conclusion might be true independent of the argument being well-formed or being malformed or just completely sucking and being full of logical fallacies. But if we adhere to the system of logic, we must be skeptical of the conclusion because the argument was. That is not the same as saying that the conclusion is false. An example might be lobsters exist or the light is off. Well, lobsters do exist, so therefore the light is off. Well, that's not a very good argument. There's problems with it. What does one have to do with the other? But it might be true that the light is indeed off, independent of the argument sucking. You might also just say, well, it's either raining outside or I'm wet, and I'm not wet, so therefore it's not raining outside. But then again, I'm inside, so I would stay dry, making that argument pretty bad as well. But it might be indeed raining outside regardless of the argument's soundness. But within the confines of logic and analysis, you must be skeptical of the conclusion because the person presenting their argument failed to make a coherent argument. There are many logical fallacies out there, over 1,000 last I checked. And recognizing each of them and identifying them is, well, difficult at times or simple depending on who you are. These fallacies indicate that something went wrong with the argument, and therefore the person or group presenting that argument hypothetically should fix the argument. With theists and apologists, rather than admitting to any errors at all, or rather than fixing their arguments, they instead say that the argument wasn't, and how dare you suggest that it was, you're just not looking at it in the right way, or you just didn't understand logic, or whatever other excuse they want to offer, but they'll never fix the dang argument. Natural language is what we're doing all the time when we talk to people. It isn't formulated into syllogisms per se. It isn't formatted in necessarily a coherent manner. And so informal logic attempts to look at conversations, look at speeches, look at essays, look at different ideas that people are putting forth and analyze that within the confines of logic as a whole, applying critical thinking, questioning, criticisms of the language being utilized. If you have a valid and sound argument, that means that the conclusion is true within logic. If you had no fallacies in the argument and the conclusion follows, then you can reliably trust that that conclusion is correct within logic. Now, you should still look in reality to see if it's really true for real, and it probably will be unless, well, we've gotten logic wrong somehow. But nonetheless, within the confines of logic and analysis, if you have a fallacious argument, then you have to be skeptical of the conclusion, and if you don't have a fallacious argument, then you don't have to be skeptical of the conclusion. No claim is exempt from analysis. It doesn't matter how the person is presenting the claim. It doesn't matter what their intent was. It does not matter. The reason that it doesn't matter is if we give special exceptions to certain claims, well then people will simply use that special exception and then feel free to make claims, and then you wouldn't be able to analyze those claims because they're exempt from analysis. Sure, you could respond to it, but you couldn't point out the logical errors that they created within their presentation. I see that as potentially leading to problems. It's very difficult to point out that somebody is wrong without pointing out that they're wrong. And one of the best ways that I know how to do that is with informal logic. Now I want to talk about the social contract. This is when we're talking to somebody and we assume innocence until guilt is proven. So when somebody says, I ate dinner last night, we assume that they're telling the truth. Maybe they're lying, but until we have proof that they're guilty, well, we assume that they're innocent. However, there are times within the social contract that we do demand evidence despite thinking that the person is making a claim that is potentially true. If I said I had dinner with the President of the United States last night, that's a different sort of claim than just having dinner last night. And I shouldn't be surprised when you demand that I provide some sort of evidence for that claim. So then the question would have to be, what changed there between one claim and the other? What makes one claim one where we're not going to demand any evidence and another one where we are going to demand evidence? What words or phrases should we be aware of that would raise red flags to say, it's time to ask for evidence, it's time to analyze their arguments, it's time to think about this more critically than otherwise? Well, there are many different ways to look at that. When somebody says the word all, always, never, none, or any other superlative like that, they're applying a blanket statement to, well, all things or no things. They're making a claim about something that might be extraordinary. It might not be extraordinary, but it depends what the claim is. To say all humans are mortal is not an extraordinary claim, but only because we understand biology and we have no counterexample to humans being immortal or not being mortal. So what's the difference then? Well, let's say somebody says, well, I can fly. Well, what they meant was they can fly a plane, but that's not what they said. They said, I can fly. And so maybe I'm assuming they think that they can actually fly. So within the confines of the social contract, perhaps I could ask for clarification. What do you mean by that? Or I might just instantly launch into, well, I need to see you fly then. I need proof. Well, let me get my plane. Oh, that's what they meant. Either way, you do get the evidence that you're seeking. And really, who is at fault there? Is it them for giving a vague statement to begin with? Or is it your fault because you dared to demand evidence for something that you thought was a rather extraordinary claim? Well, but what is an extraordinary claim? And that's a difficult question to really flesh out and answer. Perhaps you have some ideas of when something is or isn't an extraordinary claim. Well, what makes something a mundane claim and what makes it extraordinary? And again, certain hints about language can help us to identify when this occurs, superlatives being one example. All people are racist. That's an extraordinary claim to make. It might be that many people are racist, but everybody being racist? Based on what data? Based on what evidence? Based on what argument? And if I do not offer these things, then because it is an extraordinary claim, you're free to be skeptical about it. Now, it could still be true, of course, but I don't have a reason to think that it is true. Emotion versus logic. There are many potential reasons that you might object to an argument. You might disagree with how it's presented because it was over the top, or seems unfair, or that it went too far. You might disagree with the conclusion. You might be part of a fan base or a hive mind or tribalism that makes you side with one side rather than the other side. You might think that the topic gets a special pass because of what the topic is. The intent of the topic is benign, perhaps. Or maybe you think it's an opinion piece, so it's free from being analyzed. Maybe you don't like the person presenting the argument. Maybe you don't like how they sound, or what they look like, or whatever. You might believe that the intent of the person is malicious. Maybe they're doing what they're doing because they want drama or views or money or whatever. But all of this is emotion, and none of it is a logical reason to object to an argument that's being presented, or an analysis of an argument. If you don't have logical reasons, then all you have is emotion, and emotions are not logical. Being wrong is not something that one should be ashamed of. I've done my best to personally accept that when I'm wrong, it's actually a good thing, because what it means is I've learned something new. I've learned that my behavior or my statements or whatever the bleep it is was incorrect in some way, shape, or form. And then I can learn from that experience and change my behavior or how I present things or whatever it is that needs to be changed. There's certain things that I might be unwilling to change or think that are silly to change or what have you, but those too could be changed by me if somebody gave me a valid reason to do so. Being wrong is not new to me. I've been wrong in the past, and I'm pretty sure I'll be wrong in the future. And you might be right, or you might be wrong. What we have to do is learn how to accept that we could be wrong. And it doesn't matter whether or not we think that the topic at hand is one we should agree or disagree with, as long as we're willing to question our own idea about it, then we're open to all consideration of that topic. Is formal debate useless? Is debate useless? Is logic useless? Is informal logic useless? Is making YouTube videos useless? These are different questions than, is all formal debate useless? Is all debate useless? Is all logic useless? Is all informal logic useless? Is making YouTube videos always useless? There are many superlatives that change the entire structure of the question or the statement that we're making. And these superlatives are an indication that what we're saying might be more than a mundane claim, and it might therefore require evidence or at least a valid and sound argument to convince people of our conclusion. I created Deconverted Man, the channel, March 2nd, 2013, and have been creating videos on and off since then. I started by analyzing different arguments and other things that aren't necessarily arguments, and I've continued to do that since that time. I've also produced other content as well. Some people like it, some people don't. I want to encourage understanding of informal logic. That's my primary goal, and the way that I attempt to do this is by analyzing different things. I typically only analyze things that I happen to disagree with, and I might have to rethink that strategy. I've made mistakes in the past, and I'm sure I'll make mistakes in the future, and I don't mind constructive criticism. but give it to me directly. You don't need to say things behind my back. I want to know what it is that I did wrong. But you're going to have to use logic to say what was wrong and when. Because that is what my videos attempt to do. Not always, but most of the time. When you see the logical fallacy counter, that's a video where I'm attempting to analyze the argument. Except for the videos where it's used for humor, but then it's kind of obvious I'm using it for humor. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's obvious. If it's not obvious, you could be like, hey, what the bleep happened with the counter? Anyways, look. You might not like me, that's fine. Or you might love me, which would be fine too. What matters is not the person or the group. The only thing that matters is the argument. And is it valid or not? Is there evidence to back up the claims made, or is it all anecdotal? If there's no evidence, then what do you have? At best, you would have a valid argument. And if you don't have that, then what do you have to offer? Without any data, without any tests, and without any empirical evidence, the only thing you could possibly hope to have would be a valid and sound argument. And unless and until you have that, I have no choice but to be skeptical of your conclusions, whatever they might be. If you don't like that, then this is the wrong channel for you. I adhere to logic to the best of my ability, and I'm sure I screw that up. Sometimes. And I'm also sure that because I am not very good with social things, I screw that up too. I attempt to correct myself when I'm in error. If you like that fact, then stick around. If not, so be it. I'll continue to do what I do to the best of my ability to do it. And I will attempt to navigate the social sphere with better articulation than I have in the past. If I make a video against somebody that happens to be an atheist or a skeptic, I'm going to hold them to the same standards that I hold everyone else to. No one gets a free pass. Not even myself. I've looked at videos that I created when I was a Christian and explained where I went wrong. Although I don't think I've done a proper analysis as such of any of those videos, so I need to see about doing that next. If you have an issue with my logic, then point it out, and I will do my best to correct it either in video format or in text format, depending on how severe the error is and what it is I can do to repair that error. In this particular case, there seems to be a breakdown on the social level, and all I can do is try to do my best to not do that again. I think I have some idea of what went wrong and why, and all I can do is try not to do that again. But as far as actually interacting with the particular individual, I have been blocked by that person on both Twitter and YouTube. If they're willing to have a discussion about this topic or the issue that they had with my videos or me in general or whatever it is that they want to do, I'm open to doing that. It doesn't even have to be on the air or anything like that. I want them to understand where I'm coming from and to understand where they're coming from, and I want to continue to promote logic, and that's what I'm going to attempt to do in my own humble way. But as always, I must end it the way I end most videos, which is if we don't have empirical evidence, we don't have a repeatable test, and if we don't have a valid and sound argument, then we have to be skeptical of the conclusions. Also, I should add something about lobsters, because I have to mention lobsters, right?